Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville. And have you ever needed to kind of temporarily hold something together and have the stitches pull out really easily? Well, if you've been sewing for a while, you'll know that that's called basting. A temporary stitch to hold things in place before you do your regular stitch. You might baste the seams on a piece of fabric with pile, like velvet, trying to sew something like that together. You might baste all over a piece of fabric that has sew-in interfacing that needs to attach to it, or who knows, maybe even the waistband for a pair of pants. But some of the most common reasons that we want to baste is basting a quilt so that it will stay together so you can do your detail work, or basting the seams of a garment to make sure that you have the fit correct. So let's explore all of our different basting functions on our Berninas.
All right, well, we're starting off here with our Bernina 335, and I'm picking stitch number 23. Now, 23 is a basting stitch that requires you use the darning foot number 9. And you put that foot on, and what this is going to do is even if you put the old pedal to the metal, you're going to actually get one stitch only. Then you're going to hold those threads and drag your fabric through, press on your foot control, drag the fabric through for as long as of a stitch as you want. And you can see there, you just simply press on the foot control, the needle goes down and you pull. This is great for all over stitching if you're trying to hold or baste an underlining to a lining for you garment sewers, but this also works quite well if you're looking to do like basting a quilt together and things like that. Now let's have a look at our regular stitch. We've hopped on over to our Bernina 770 Plus, and if we look at this stitch here, you'll see it's pretty close together. And depending on the thickness of the fabric that you're using, your basting stitches may not need to be so super long. So for instance, we can take our stitch length adjustment and adjust our stitch to 6 millimeters long and stitch that out. And if this were like a little wispy chiffon fabric, that might just be a basting stitch. But I'm using this Ruby Star heavy woven fabric. And with those, we typically want to have a much longer stitch. So now I've engaged the basting function on this one. So this yields us a 12 millimeter long basting stitch. That's with our stitch length at 6 and the basting function engaged. See, it's twice as long as that other stitch that was just stitched out there. And that's because the basting function actually takes every second stitch out. So therefore, if you had a 6 millimeter stitch, but it's programmed to take out a second stitch, 6 plus 6 is 12. So that's why that stitch is twice as long. But then what we can do is actually choose some stitches. And those stitches are like stitch number 21, for instance. This one is a basting stitch that takes a stitch every fourth stitch. So what it's going to do is stitch and then skip, 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 stitch. And because of this, we are able to take a stitch that can go all the way up to 24 millimeters in length. And this might be important if you are just trying to really baste a quilt. Once again, we talked about it doesn't have to necessarily be a quilt. You could be basting batting to some kind of wearable garment. You could be basting velvet. You could be doing all sorts of things like that. It doesn't always have to be quilting related, but the 24 millimeter basting stitch is usually reserved for super thick fabric and things like that.
And as you can see here, through this thick fabric, as I'm pulling the threads, it's given me a little bit more trouble. But as I go up through all of the longer basting stitches, these stitches pull out really easily. So now let's talk about how you could use the basting stitches for other applications. So I'm sure in your sewing hobby, you have actually done a long stitch for gathering, but you can gather a lot, a little, or just a scotch or whatever with using these basting and long stitches. So all you have to do is stitch a row and then pull the bobbin thread, and you can see there what a lovely full gathering that does. And in fact, you could actually do row after row
of stitching. And then you could kind of create a machine smocking effect with this technique. And then, of course, this would be a tutorial for down the road, but it just gives you some options for those of you that, make garments and clothing for your kids or your grandkids.
And then think about all of the things that you might want to kind of sew together first that have multiple layers. Like in this case, we're doing double layers of ruffles on a heavier material. And usually with this, I'll baste really close to the raw edge there. And then I'll come along and do another stitch further in outside of the seam allowance. But I'm using the long stitch. Any that are 12 millimeter and longer are perfect for this. And then what I'll do is take my final stitch, my actual stitch that's going to hold the piece together, and I'll stitch in between those stitches. And what this is doing is it's flattening out all of those layers to make it more manageable when you assemble your final item. And then it's easy to just pick any of those basting stitches out that are visible after you do your final seam. And of course, a practical and very easy method for fitting a garment is to baste or use a long stitch on your seams so that when you try it on, if you have to make any alterations or anything like that, you can easily remove the stitches. And, sometimes if there's no alterations necessary, you can just stitch right over the seams with the regular stitch so it's secured and then pick out whatever is left behind in the seam allowance. And there are times when you might be making a jacket, pants, whatever, and you have underlining or you have sew-in interfacing. And this is a great opportunity to hold those layers together as you construct so that they don't shift on you. This is also a suitable way to baste a small quilted item, such as pot holders, placemats, or apparel that you are pre-quilting before you sew it into a garment. So if you want to baste a quilt and use your BERNINA Stitch Regulator on the BERNINA 770 Plus, the 790 Pro, and the 735 with the Stitch Regulator, there is a basting feature, and it's BSR Mode 3. And you have two options. You have 4 stitches per inch or 2 stitches per inch. And because this is free motion, you can just higgledy-piggledy go over your quilt sandwich however you feel like to hold those layers together. Now, of course, in our example here, we have just a little scrap, but this you might want to reserve for larger quilts and, things that might take you a while to actually do your pretty free motion quilting on.
Well, I hope you found this tutorial valuable, and I hope you give some of these things a try. And don't forget, it's always good to come up with your own ways to do things, and there are 100 different ways that we can baste on our machines. And if you are a hand baster, there's nothing wrong with that. But just know that your Bernina has your back. All right, if you want to see more videos like this and other tutorials, don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy basting.